which was, I think, totally a ridiculous decision. And they're suing Google for a lot of money. They're suing a lot of other companies, and we don't like the way they're treating our people now. We don't like the way they're treating our companies. They sell us cars. We don't sell them cars. They don't take our cars. They don't take much of our agriculture. And we have a deficit with them of about $350 billion. So I wouldn't say it's been such a great relationship personally, but other people did, because it's politically correct to say that it's been good, but it hasn't been good. And we're going to change that. And we are going to have reciprocal tariffs. We're not going to have tariff, we're going to have reciprocal. Whatever they charge us, we're going to charge them, which for many years, foolishly, I would have done that, but then all of a sudden we had COVID and we had other things to think about. So it took me a little while to get that on, but we had, in my first 4 years, we had the greatest economy in the history of, I think, the world, but certainly in the history of our country. I think we're going to have that again, but the EU was very, very tough on us from the standpoint of trade. Then you could take it a step further and go into NATO, and that was a very tough situation for us. I mean, that's been a very tough situation because we were paying a disproportionate share, and it wasn't good. So, as you know, they paid hundreds of billions of dollars after I got involved, and they evened it out a little bit, but not very much. And then if you look at the war, we're in for $300 billion plus, and they're in for $100 billion. They get their money back, and now we'll get our money back also. But under Biden, you wouldn't have done that. Biden did a terrible job, I have to say. I hate to say that about somebody that sat here just before me, but he did a terrible, terrible job. That war should have never happened, the war between Russia and Ukraine. Frankly, October 7th should have never happened. Israel, that should have never happened. What happened there should have never. Inflation should have never happened. Afghanistan should have never happened. The way they got out, not getting out, but the way they got out. So, but I can say that as far as we're here for a different reason. We're talking about a very different place, and this is some place that I have investments there. I own Turnberry, I own Aberdeen, and I own a great place called Doonbeg in Ireland. So, you know, I have a great warm spot for your country.
And our trade, obviously, is fair and balanced, and in fact, you've got a bit of a surplus, so we're in a different position there. And obviously, we contributed hugely in relation to Ukraine, and taken together with Europe, was about 50%.
It'll work.
It'll work.
On a personal level,
Thank you. So does that mean there won't be any sanctions on the UK then?
We'll have to take a look. I mean, we're going to have a good discussion today, and we have some very talented people on the other side, and we have some people that probably aren't as talented as them, but they're pretty good. Marco, what do you think? Our people are pretty good. And no, we're going to have a good discussion, and we'll be talking about that.
Mr. President, I just wanted to ask, Mr. Starmer, the Prime Minister, has said that he believes that Vladimir Putin would be at risk of invading Ukraine again without a sufficient backstop. Do you think that Vladimir Putin would be likely to invade again in the event of peace?
I don't think so. I think when we have a deal, it's going to be the deal. I don't think if I didn't win the election, I don't think we'd be even talking to Putin right now or anybody else. I think it would just, you know, I don't know if you're looking at the stats, but thousands of people are being killed a week, soldiers mostly, because the towns have been destroyed. But thousands of soldiers. This was a very bad week, by the way. I get the stats.
Total numbers.
And you're talking about a human life. Number one, I want to see that, and it doesn't involve American soldiers, but it's Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, and I think I'm speaking for both. Number one, we want to see that stop, and number two, I want to stop paying the kind of money that we're talking about. You know, we're helping, and we're helping NATO, but we're helping a lot, more than anybody else by far, and I want that to stop also.
Thank you, sir. You talked about trade tariffs this morning on your
I did, yeah.
side. Just a question about China. The 10% tariffs has already been implemented on China. Are you
now that's an
planning to do
additional 10 above the 10.
This will be an additional 10 above. And is there, from the talks with Canada and Mexico so far, are you not seeing the progress that you wanted in order to
I don't see it at all, no, not on drugs. We've done a great job. If you look at Tom Homan, he's been incredible, and Christie, they've done a great job in terms of the border. But the drugs continue to pour into our country, killing hundreds of thousands of people. We're losing substantially more than 100,000 people. I mean, dead. They're dead. The families are destroyed after that happens. So it's, you know, it's not just that. That's the ultimate, but the families are absolutely destroyed. The drugs come in through Mexico. They come, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them come from China. And that's why we did that. It's 10 plus 10.
10 plus 10.
Was there confusion on that?
There was, sir, yeah.
Okay, 10 plus 10. It's a second 10. And I think I think you're going to see, eventually you're going to see drugs stopping, because the country should not be allowing those drugs to come into the United States of America, and we're not going to allow it to happen. So that goes on the 4th of March. And then on the 2nd of April, we have reciprocal tariffs. That's reciprocal, where we charge countries what they're charging us, and nobody should have a problem with that. We have reciprocal. It's reciprocity. It's something that I think everybody I've spoken to said that's fair, and it is. If somebody charges us 25%, we charge them 25. If somebody charges us 10 or 15 or 30 or 70, we charge them an exact like amount. And it's pretty simple, but it's reciprocal tariffs, because the United States has been taken advantage of by many, many different countries, including our friends, friend and foe. And in many cases, our friends took bigger advantage of it. When you talk about the EU, we're talking about the EU. The EU has been really very bad to us in terms of trade. And I'm a different...
You're listening to Times Radio. We are listening now live to the President of the United States, sitting side by side with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, in the White House, taking questions from the media ahead of their private talks and later a news conference there at the White House. The quality of the sound, as you can hear there, is not what we would wish. Apologies for that. That is, as you can imagine, not in our control. But we are keen that you hear this as it happens, because from what we've heard so far, there have been already quite a few nuggets of news, and I'm going to summarize with those for you as we go on. We can't go back. The quality of the sound is not quite what we would wish. It wouldn't quite work for you. Let me just summarize what we've heard so far, because we've had a lot of really very considerable interest ahead of those talks between the Prime Minister and the President. Very clearly, at the start of this session, there's the President showing absolutely no interest in the kind of security backstop to be provided by America in the event of a ceasefire. Keir Starmer is sitting there next to him, ready to go into the next round of these private talks, looking for some sort of military component on America's side for that backstop. No, the President was not going there. As far as he was concerned, a mineral deal would provide the sort of guarantee, it seems, as much of a guarantee as he's prepared to give. And just mention this too, the question of the Chagos Islands came up. Yesterday, we heard the Foreign Secretary David Lammy saying America would have a veto on this question of returning sovereignty to the Chagos Island. Well, Donald Trump is saying there it was a good deal. So no veto. I think we can go back now to that conversation in the White House. Keir Starmer speaking.
Mr. President.
And I think I can say that will be the easy part. That's the part we look forward to, because putting security there, that's the part we all look forward to. That's easy. The difficult part is getting the deal made. So,
Yeah.
but I think we've come a long way. Did you have something?
Yeah, on a personal level.
He's got such a nice face.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, he's smiling. But what? She'll ask a total killer.
No,
I've known him a long time.
They're the ones that get you. No, he
I
looks
was going
like
to
a
ask
nice
on a personal level, Mr. President, what do you get on most? What's your common ground with Sir Keir Starmer? Because you're both from different political backgrounds.
It's true. I think I can say this because we've known each other now really for a little while. This is not our first meeting, as you know. He loves his country, and so do I. That's our common theme. He loves his country, and I love our country. And we also have two countries that have gotten along for the longest period of time. Number one ally on each side. And we have good France and Australia. We have a lot of good ones. But we've had a long-time relationship, a long time, hundreds of years. And we like each other, frankly, and we like each other's country, and we love our country. And I think that's our common thread.
Mr. President, Europeans.
Yeah, please.
On tariffs, you just said China.
Who are you with?
I'm with the Independent.
Oh, that's good.
On tariffs, you just said
It's
that China,
independent, yeah.
you charge them You charge them as you charge China, but the tariffs are paid eventually by American importers and consumers.
No, they're not. No, I think they're paid for by the country. But, you know, look, we can get into that. I put a lot of tariffs on in my first term, and we made tremendous amounts of progress because of those tariffs. China paid us hundreds of billions of dollars, billions. We never had because they took advantage. And President Xi's a friend of mine, but he knows better than anybody he took advantage of our country. He took advantage of presidents that didn't know what they were doing. And they expect them. They actually expect them. The smart countries expect them from me because they know me and they know our country. But they got away with murder for decades, and we just can't let that happen anymore. Behind you, please.
That's very kind, Mr. President. It sounds as though one of you completely trusts President Putin and one of you doesn't trust him an inch. Have I got that right? And why should you trust
No,
him?
look, you know, it's trust and verify, let's call it that. And I think we both can be that way. You have to verify, because you never know what's going to happen. I know a lot of people that you would say no chance that they would ever deceive you, and they're the worst people in the world. I know others that you would guarantee they would deceive you. And you know what? They're 100% honorable, so you never know what you're getting. No, I have confidence that if we make a deal, it's going to hold.
Mr. President, on fentanyl, Mr. President, less than 1% of all fentanyl that comes into the U.S. is apprehended at the Canadian border. So why use fentanyl as a reason?
Because they should
to
be
impose
apprehending
tariffs
much
on
more. They're only apprehending 1%. You're right about that. It's a little more than that. But they should be apprehending much more because a lot comes through Canada. And as Mexico gets stronger in terms of the border, it goes up to Canada. And a lot of drugs are coming in through Canada. We can't have that.
Mr. President,
Yeah, go ahead, please, in the back.
Is there anything you can say tomorrow to President Zelensky to reassure him that his country's war hasn't been in vain and its sovereignty is not going to be threatened by any deal with Russia?
Well, you know, he's coming. Perhaps he's already on his way. And we're going to be signing the deal together, probably in front of the media. And we're going to be having a good conversation. No, we want to work with him. President Zelensky, she said before, we want to work with him, and we will work with him. I think the president and I actually have had a very good relationship. It maybe got a little bit testy because we wanted to have a little bit of what the European nations had. You know, they get their money back by giving money. We don't get the money back. Biden made a deal. He put in $350 billion. And I thought it was a very unfair situation.
We're not getting all of ours. I mean, quite a bit of ours was gifted. It was given. There were some lends, but mainly it was gifted, actually.
Mr. President, the Europeans want Ukraine to be part of NATO as part of this deal. Are you willing to budge on that at all, or is it a firm?
Well, I could be very nice and say, oh, well, we'll work to it. Look, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. That's what started this whole thing. Biden said that, and all of a sudden the gun started. That was one of the primary reasons it started. And this was long before President Putin. They never said it was an impossibility. So we can say, oh, gee, well, we'll try, but that's something that's just not going to happen. And then the other question you ask is about the land. Will you get your land back? Well, they fought long and hard on the land, and you and I will be discussing that, and we're going to certainly try and get as much as we can back. But on the NATO, it's just not, that's not going to happen. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, you talked about having common ground with Keir Starmer, but there are things you disagree on as well. You described Zelensky as a dictator. You described President Putin as a dictator. Do you see that as a problem?
The relationship between President Zelensky and President Putin is not a good one. You've noticed, right? It's not a good one. It's not a good relationship. And we're going to have to try and work something out. Sometimes that happens. I get along with both. I have a very good relationship with President Putin. I think I have a very good relationship with President Zelensky. And now we're doing the deal, and we're going to be in there. We're going to be actually in there, digging our hearts out. And hopefully, we need the rare earth, and we have some here, but we don't have enough. Our economy is very strong, and we need a lot of things that, in some cases, we don't have here. So I think we're going to have a very good relationship, but the relationship between them is not the best.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah,
sir.
George Parker from the Financial Times. Can you see any situation where US forces could be deployed as a backstop in a peacekeeping operation in direct confrontation with the Russian forces?
Well, there is a backstop thing. You know, first you're going to have European countries because they're right there. We're very far away. We have an ocean between us. But we want to make sure it works. So I don't know when you say backstop, you mean a backstop psychologically or militarily or what? But we are a backstop because we'll be over there. We'll be working in the country. We're going to be, that's a great thing economically for them because, you know, when you talk about economic development, we're going to have a lot of people over there. So we'll be working in the country. So I just don't think you're going to have a problem. I think when we have an agreement, you can say whatever you want about security, who's going to do it or on, and that's going to be a very pleasant conversation. The hard conversation is, will we have an agreement? And I think the answer is yes. I think Russia will agree, and I think that I really believe Ukraine will agree also.
So just to follow up on that, if British troops are in Ukraine keeping the peace and get attacked by Russia, will you come to their aid?
If the British people are in Ukraine and they get attacked.
If British soldiers are in Ukraine.
You know, I've always found about the British, they don't need much help. They can take care of themselves very well.
That sounds like
you know what? No, it sounds like it's evasive, but it's not evasive. You know, the British have been incredible soldiers, incredible military, and they can take care of themselves. But if they need help, I'll always be with the British, okay? I will always be with them. But they don't need help. You look at their career, you have done very well over the years, haven't you?
We have. I'm very proud of our country. And but we've also always been there backing each other up between our two countries. That is why this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security I think the world has ever seen. Whenever necessary, we absolutely backed each other up, and that's at the
Could you
core
take
of the
on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
all right, one or two more. Yes, ma'am.
In his remarks at the Munich Security Conference, Vice President Vance condemned free speech violations in the UK, particularly. Could you respond? What is your message?
Well, I have an idea. We have the man right here. Come on. Let's go, JD. We're putting you on stage.
Great. Yeah, look, I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time.
You don't agree with that?
Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
Were you discussing AUKUS, were you discussing AUKUS with the Australians and the Brits? Were you discussing AUKUS with the Prime Minister, sir?
What does that mean?
AUKUS, the Australia-US Defence Alliance.
Yeah, well, we'll be discussing that. We've had another great relationship, and you have too, with Australia.
Yeah.
We've had a very good relationship with Australia.
Mr. President, while we have a Vice President here, are you both disappointed that the AFD didn't come first in the German elections, given your previous support for me?
No, whatever happens with Germany, look, the relationship has been very strong with Germany, but we'll have to see what happens. They have a lot of things going on right now. We'll have to see. No, I'm not disappointed about anything. If anything, you would say that the group that we would be most opposed to lost, but we got along with them also. We have a very good relationship with all groups in Germany.
Mr. President, former CEO Eric Fritz was on our channel News Nation. He was talking about this proposal to use private forces to assist in deportations. Have you read that proposal, and do you support it?
No, I haven't seen it. I don't think it's necessary. Our people are doing a phenomenal job. I wouldn't be opposed to it necessarily, but I'd go to our military people, and I'd go to Tom Homan and Christie. I'd go to the various and ask, but I don't see it as being. We're doing unbelievably in getting people out, getting criminals out, people that should have never been here, that the Biden administration with their stupid open borders should have never allowed. They came in from prisons and jails and mental institutions, and gang members and drug dealers coming into our country like this. We're getting them out, and we're doing really well. I mean, the level of effectiveness has been incredible. Everybody's talking about it. How about one more?
Mr. President, on
Wait,
measles.
no, you've asked.
Mr. President, one on the Middle East.
Go ahead. You look so nice. Here we go. Here's the kill.
Mr. President, are there areas specifically in Ukraine that you're talking about in giving back, specifically Crimea? Have you gotten to those details yet on such a thing?
Well, you mean the areas that were taken?
Yes.
There are a lot of areas that were taken. Yeah, we've talked about it. A lot of the sea line has been taken. And we'll be talking about that. And we're going to see if we can get it back. We'll get a lot of it back for Ukraine, if that's possible. We'll be seeing about that. Okay?
One last one.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Chris.
Very much.
We're heading out.
Thank you.
And that then seems to end that pre-news conference by President Trump and Prime Minister Starmer sitting side by side in front of that fire, not burning this time, but there was enough going on in the room there to keep things warm. They're going to go into private talks now, and we'll be hearing from them again. At some point after 7, you can hear all of that here on Times Radio. I'm guessing from what we've heard so far, you will want to be with us. This is worth a very close listen. Let me just mention, too, that in the morning on Times Radio Breakfast from 6, we're going to see Asma and we're going to see Callum talking to Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary. They'll be chewing over all that we're hearing now and all that we're going to be hearing later. And there'll be a great deal to chew over. Now, we listened to that pre-news conference there by the President and the Prime Minister. You'll have heard the quality of the sound was not all that we would wish. Again, apologies for that. We could do nothing about that. But we stayed with it live and uninterrupted because we did not want you to miss anything of what was being said. And I think you'll agree with us. It was worth a close listen. There were solid gold bars of news in that period of question and answer from the President and the Prime Minister. I'm just going to recap on one or two of the main points before talking to our guests in the studio, who I should say are Rachel Sylvester, Times columnist. Good to see you here, Rachel. Thank you for coming in. And Joe Tanner is with us too. And Luke Trill, our pollster friend, is going to be with us. We can talk about what the people think about all of this. But what did we get from that session between the two leaders? Well, where do I start? At the beginning of that question and answer session, there was a very direct question. Would President Trump be willing to go along with the request, which he will be getting from Prime Minister Starmer in the talk starting about now, for some kind of guarantee that if there's a ceasefire and if there's a multinational force on the ground in Ukraine made up of European allies to try to keep that peace, will America be ready to step in if they are needed? No expectation of American boots on the ground as part of that, but some sort of military backup. Well, at the beginning of that question and answer session, the President seemed absolutely dismissive of that, arguing that no need for that. We're looking for a business deal, a mineral deal with Ukraine. That will be, he argued at that point, enough. And then, just a few moments ago, well, frankly, something that sounded rather like a contradiction. And we're becoming rather used to this from President Trump, aren't we? He was asked, by another journalist, would America be there if they are needed, if British forces are attacked? And what did the President say? Well, if they need our help, we will always help the British. And at this point, if you stop the conversation there, you would say Donald Trump is saying, yes, there will be some sort of military backup for a force, including British troops on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. That's where we are now. Does that mean that's where we're going to be in a couple of hours' time? You've got to say not necessarily. It was one of those curious and interesting contradictions that the President has made his trademark.
And he then went on to say, but they don't need our help.
But they don't need our help. So it sounded like a guarantee, which he said would never be needed. Where did that leave us? Well, Keir Starmer will try and get some further clarity. Would he get clarity? Maybe we'll find out at 7 o'clock. Will that clear things up?
And even if he does, he might not remember that he said it.
Well, that too. I'm going to mention a couple of other lines of what struck me as news in what we were hearing there. The Prime Minister is going to be talking to the President about tariffs that the President is now today talking about imposing on friendly countries around the world. There are to be new tariffs on trade coming into the United States, Canada and Mexico, and he's increasing tariffs on China. The very direct question where Britain was concerned was, would there be a carve-out for Britain? But it wasn't a full answer. It wasn't the clearest answer. But we did hear the President say that it would work out. So the tone of that sounded warm, as if he was minded to be cooperative on that subject. There'd be more talks, no doubt pretty much as we're speaking now, but something like encouragement from the President. Will it endure? Will it not? Who knows? Let's try and find out later on when the questions are put again after the private talks in that news conference. And more and more to tell you about, to share with you, to hear your thoughts and to discuss with Joe Tanner, with Rachel Sylvester and with Luke Trill here on Times Radio with me, John Pienaar, in association with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more. Tanner, political strategist, and Rachel Sylvester, Times columnist, here with me for Pienaar and Friends, along with Luke Trill, economist for More in Common. We are digesting, or we're trying to. We're chewing hard. It takes a certain amount of chewing when you listen to a session like that involving the President and the Prime Minister side by side. Each come and get it from different angles, and all of us in real time seeking to decipher what we're hearing from President Trump, which we're going to be doing over the course of the next half hour and through the evening here on Times Radio. They are talking, we are thinking, we will be translating, and then we'll be listening again after 7 o'clock, sometime when they do their news conference. Just really briefly at this point, before we go to the news, guys. And again, thanks for joining us and coming in to share your thoughts. Rachel, what did you make of what we've been hearing?
Well, just slightly mad. So, the idea, he's asked about whether Zelensky's a dictator. Did I say that? What are you going to do about AUKUS? What's that? 1
minute. He was trying to play nice.
It's just sort of 1 minute, we'll always be there for the Brits. The next minute, will we? So it's the kind of roller coaster unpredictability. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, Joe, what do you think?
I thought the piece of theatre with the letter from the King, where Trump said, have I got to read this now? And it was offering this visit that was highly anticipated. But even to Trump going down and saying what a beautiful signature it was, checking it was a proper official letter. And just extraordinary, a Labour Prime Minister, the Labour leader that replaced Jeremy Corbyn, who was so anti the royals, and yet we've got a Labour Prime Minister using the King as the trump card, literally, to open up that extraordinary sort of session that we've just watched. I just thought was fascinating.
Yeah. And the Prime Minister also, as part of his visit, has made a gift of tartan to President Trump. It's the tartan of Donald Trump's family on his mother's side, and no doubt he'll be appreciating that. He certainly seemed to enjoy the royal visit and actually said yes. That was not a surprise, that he said yes to the invitation from the King, personally signed by Charles himself. Luke, last word from you, really briefly. We'll talk more after the news. What did you make of it? What do you think people are going to be making of it?
Well, you just saw that sort of tightrope that Keir Starmer's on. He was trying to play it as nice as possible with President Trump, but there was that one moment when he pushed back, when Trump suggested that all of the Europeans were getting their money back, and actually Keir Starmer then did just push and said, we're not getting all of ours back. We've made lots of gifts as well. So, and I think that's going to be the strategy for this more widely. It's mostly playing nice and just a few points of actually, do you know what, we're going to stand our ground here?
Yeah, I mean, the president does seem in a mood to play nice. Whether everything that he says, rings sweetly in Keir Starmer's ears when we get to the later news conference, or even after that, when it's analysed and people try to decide what did all that actually mean. These are other questions. We'll make a start on that process now, after the news, when we carry on having this conversation while we're all of us waiting for the next stage in our coverage after the private talks, that news conference at the White House. This is Pienaar and Friends. The time now is 6:31. Let's get the news. Well, I suppose the highest level of diplomacy, President Trump and the Prime Minister Keir Starmer meeting as I speak now in private in the White House, talking over some of the things they've foreshadowed just in the last half hour or so. Some of the answers from questions to the media, very, very interesting. Who on earth knows what we're going to be getting when they come back out of that meeting and stand at the podium and take more media questions at the formal news conference. Rachel Sylvester's here, Joe Tanner's here, Luke Trill, pollster from More in Common is here, and Kate Borse is going to be picking up the baton and running with it after this showcase.
Yeah, high stakes, this, John. We don't know what's happening behind closed doors, but we do know that it seems to have got off fairly well for both men. I see that they're wearing matching purple ties. There was a brief handshake outside the door to the West Wing, and Trump appearing to call Starmer handsome. You look handsome, he said, was what's been interpreted from that. And then a proposal, it seemed, a state visit, an invite from King Charles. The answer is yes, said Donald Trump. So I love the whole theatrics of it so far. It's very engaging. There's some good news on a Chagos deal that's been lent into heavily by Donald Trump. Peacekeeping forces in Ukraine, French and English, French and UK forces, boots on the ground. Trump said a deal needs to be agreed before they start talking about peacekeeping forces. So he wouldn't be drawn on that publicly before their one-on-one, at least. There's going to be a lot on the agenda. I guess timing-wise, I mean, I think you just need to stay with us on Times Radio if you're listening and you're interested to hear what this means. And my goodness me, the ramifications of it are historic. They really are. This is, as Stephen Swinford, the political editor of The Times, said earlier, this is singly the most important meeting of Keir Starmer's prime ministerial career so far, and it could really inform the next few years ahead for him, and also to a certain extent the United States as well. There's loads to discuss. We'll be speaking to Alexandra Hall on our show, former British diplomat. She's across it for us. We are, of course, going to be speaking to the Times' brilliant team over in Washington. Professor Mark Galeotti will talk about the US-Russia talks that have happened today. And we'll also be looking ahead, time depending, it's all very flexible. We'll be looking ahead to President Zelensky's trip to Washington tomorrow, and the extraordinary news that Trump actually wanted to call it off until Macron jumped on the phone and said, you've got to have it. It's got to be done. I will guarantee Zelensky and his word, and is back on again. So look, loads of drama behind the scenes. Let's see what's going to happen after the news conference.
And on we go. Kate Borsay taking on this story after 7 o'clock. Just 20 minutes' time, but the story is going to roll on well after that. And we can now say hello and good evening to Charlotte McDonald-Gibson, who's Times correspondent in Washington there. Hello to you, Charlotte. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, John.
Hi, so we're processing this. We're trying to process this. Tell me how it seemed to you. What did you take away from all of that, Charlotte?
Well, yes, as always with Trump, there's a lot to process. And, I guess, where do we start? We look at the optics, first of all, and we had that sort of warm handshake. We had a lot of positive words from Donald Trump, calling him a special man, talking about Britain being a wonderful country. And of course, Starmer did come bearing gifts, which is what Donald Trump likes, in the form of a letter from King Charles inviting Donald Trump to do a second state visit. I was quite struck with how effusive the Prime Minister was, talking about how unprecedented it was and how very, very special it was, even going for the sort of tap on Donald Trump's shoulder, it's almost emulating Macron's very touchy-feely relationship with Trump, but in a slightly more reserved British way. So the optics were good. A lot of positive words. You mentioned the Chagos Islands. I think that will, having that statement saying, he thought it was a pretty good deal at this stage before they've even gone into the talks. I mean, that's great. That looks good for Starmer. Same on tariffs. He didn't say, well, we're not going to put tariffs on the UK, but he spoke a lot more about the EU and how he is very much more targeting the EU, and the UK was in a warm spot. So there's a lot of positives there. But if we come back to the key reason, the key outcome that Keir Starmer wants, and that is some sort of security backstop from the United States, if there's any Ukraine peace deal, on that, we don't see much movement. So I think, let's see what happens in the next couple of hours. I think that's going to be the key question that comes out of the press conference later.
Yeah, or rather the movement that we did see seemed to be all over the place, going forward then going backwards. At one point saying, look, don't think about a military element to an American backstop, security backstop, if there's a peace deal and a multinational force on the ground. And then later on saying, look, if Britain needs us, we're going to be there. Now make of that what you will. We'll see if that develops further. It ended up on a positive note. Is it going to stay on a positive note? Just recap on some of what we've been hearing. So, look, in no particular order, Chagos Islands, that was one of the stories of the evening so far. The president was asked about the future of the Chagos Islands.
Well, we're going to have some discussions about that very soon, and I have a feeling it's going to work out very well. They're talking about a very long-term, powerful lease, a very strong lease, about 140 years, actually. That's a long time, and I think we'll be inclined to go along with your country?
Said the president on the Chagos Island. Now, what about whether he thought Vladimir Putin would invade again?
No, I don't think so. I think when we have a deal, it's going to be the deal. I don't think if I didn't win the election, I don't think we'd be even talking to Putin right now or anybody else. I think it would just, you know, I don't know if you're looking at the stats, but thousands of people are being killed a week, soldiers mostly, because the towns have been destroyed. But thousands of soldiers. This was a very bad week, by the way. I get the stats.
Total numbers.
And you're talking about a human life. Number one, I want to see that, and it doesn't involve American soldiers, but it's Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, and I think I'm speaking for both.
Yeah.
Number one, we want to see that stop, and number two, I want to stop paying the kind of money that we're talking about. You know, we're helping, and we're helping NATO, but we're helping a lot, more than anybody else by far, and I want that to stop also.
The president said that he thought Russia was acting very well in relation to the peace negotiations, and he was asked about NATO membership for Ukraine.
Well, I could be very nice and say, oh, well, we'll work to it. Look, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. That's what started this whole thing. And Biden said that, and all of a sudden the gun started. That was one of the primary reasons it started. And this was long before President Putin. They never said it was an impossibility. So we can say, oh, gee, well, we'll try, but that's something that's just not going to happen. And then the other question you ask is about the land. Will you get your land back? Well, they fought long and hard on the land, and you and I will be discussing that, and we're going to certainly try and get as much as we can back.
So, said President Trump, NATO membership for Ukraine was not going to happen. And just for good measure, he suggested the idea of a NATO membership for Ukraine was a primary reason for the Russian invasion. Again, putting the blame where clearly it does not belong, a bone of contention with Ukraine's allies. And those who would have called themselves America's allies, not though on this question, not by a very long way. The president commented on his relationship with President Zelensky of Ukraine, and there was something of a correction from Keir Starmer.
We want to work with him, and we will work with him. I think the president and I actually have had a very good relationship. It maybe got a little bit testy because we wanted to have a little bit of what the European nations had. You know, they get their money back by giving money. We don't get the money back. Biden made a deal. He put in $350 billion. And I thought it was a very unfair situation.
We're not getting all of ours. I mean, quite a bit of ours was gifted. It was given. There were some lends, but mainly it was gifted, actually.
So Keir Starmer following in the footsteps of Emmanuel Macron in contradicting the president on that question of who is paying most to support Ukraine. The version from President Trump we've heard before, simply inaccurate, and there was Keir Starmer telling him so. And here was a bit, again, worth noting, the journalist who asked the president whether America would step in if British soldiers were attacked while taking part in a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine.
You know, I've always found about the British, they don't need much help. They can take care of themselves very well.
That sounds like
you know what? No, it sounds like it's evasive, but it's not evasive. You know, the British have been incredible soldiers, incredible military, and they can take care of themselves. But if they need help, I'll always be with the British, okay? I'll always be with them. But they don't need help. You look at their career, you have done very well over the years, haven't you?
We have. I'm very proud of our country. And but we've also always been there backing each other up between our two countries. That is why this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security I think the world has ever seen. Whenever necessary, we absolutely backed each other up, and that's at the
Could
core
you
of
take
the
on
relationship.
Russia by yourselves?
Well...
So Keir Starmer, they're very keen to seize on that comment from President Trump. We're always there to back each other up, because that's what Donald Trump said. Did it add up to a shift in his position on a security guarantee from America? Less sure, frankly, about all of that. After all, we did hear the president confront it with his comment recently, such a controversial comment when he spoke about Volodymyr Zelensky being a dictator. What he said was this: "Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Well, we can believe that he said that. He didn't just say it, he wrote it, and then he said it again. More to talk about, and we will be discussing it here on Pienaar and Friends for you. And we want to hear what you are thinking. What on earth do you make of what we are hearing and what we're talking about this evening? Let's go further. Let's talk together. Let's chat on Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio, coming to you in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Times Radio app and via your smart speaker. John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion.
And here with me in the studio, Joe Tanner, political strategist, Rachel Sylvester, Times columnist, and Luke Trill, pollster from More in Common. And from across the Atlantic, Charlotte McDonald-Gibson, the Washington correspondent for The Times. Charlotte, can I just come back to you on what was a pretty firm and hard nugget of news from that sort of very impromptu news conference in the White House, Charlotte, when we heard the president being, well, I suppose, unambiguously warm towards the plan for the Chagos Islands, the returning of sovereignty to Mauritius. There's obviously a US base involved there. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, well, saying out loud that America could veto this deal. Well, from Donald Trump a moment ago, Charlotte, no veto at all.
Yes, yeah, indeed. I mean, I'd say that was a little bit of a surprise, considering, as you said, it had been raised as a point of contention. And he really just seemed to sort of say, oh, well, it seems pretty good. I'm sure we can go along with that. It didn't seem like he, was putting a huge amount of thought into his answer there. So maybe it's a case of, well, they're going to get down to the nitty-gritty in this meeting. But yeah, certainly on the surface of things, it seems very positive. Of course, Trump's concern was about, Chinese influence in the area. So, maybe he's had some reassurances on that point. We just don't know at this point. But yes, that was certainly one takeaway, which I think Starmer will be buoyed by as he goes into the meetings.
I imagine he will be. Rachel and Joe and Luke. Rachel, the Chagos Islands has been a thorn, or a political thorn in Keir Starmer's side since the deal was announced. This will be very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to have that sort of nugget of good news for Starmer, assuming he can hold on to it and it doesn't get swept away, as Charlotte suggests, that's at least a sort of moral victory for him at this stage. But I mean, as Charlotte said, everything is so unpredictable with Trump, and it all comes down to the detail. There are still questions about where does the money come from for this deal. Is he going to divert any of the money from the defence spending extra allocation that he's announced? So it's going to continue to be a thorn in his side. But I think at least not having Donald Trump as an additional splinter.
Well, especially since Donald Trump had it within his power, very clearly it's a veto the deal. And his answer to that did sound as if he'd actually thought about it.
There was one interesting caveat, though. Ross Kempsell, the former Boris advisor who's now in the Lords, said that no journalist present in the Oval Office tweeted this part of Trump's comments on Chagos, and claims it revealed in the full tape. He's just said this on X. The start of the comments from Trump said, "It's a little bit early, we have to be given the details," and then gave his answer on Chagos. So there was a tiny caveat.
A little bit of wriggle
There was
room
a
there.
tiny caveat. But I mean, ultimately, he's also now claiming that he didn't say what he said about Zelensky, so we know he could row back from anything he says. But just an interesting small caveat there that suggests that Trump is, perhaps waiting for more info.
But if
and
he's
perhaps
talking
that's the
details,
question.
he seems to have embraced the principle.
I mean, I would
Starmer
take it.
grab
I
that
would
with
take
both
it as a
arms.
win from Starmer's point of view. Let's face it. Looking at this whole thing, it's started incredibly well.
Yes.
So much better than we expected. I noticed even a tweet as well from the MAGA Voice group, which are always putting out loads of stuff about how wonderful Trump is, and it says, breaking: King Charles III stuns the world by inviting Donald Trump for another state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented. With a heart. Everybody loves Trump. I mean, they pulled off a masterstroke with that bit of theatre. There's no question that has set the tone to then get the thorny stuff in. But, the strategy between him and Macron was clearly, let's just warm up Trump. Let's show him some love. Let's see what we can get. Let's see what we can get through. And I'd say, there's going to be some unravelling, I'm sure, but it's not a bad start for Starmer at all.
Well, let's leave aside the fact that the invitation from the King to a second state visit was the least surprising thing we've heard this evening. It clearly went down well, and it did its job in a big way. Luke, just give us a perspective then, from the point of view of people listening in, looking in, the data of what people are thinking about these issues now. What really struck out for you?
Well, I think, one of the things we've been picking up in focus groups recently is a real nervousness about what Trump means for the UK, and this sense of, well, actually, the UK doesn't have much of a say in the world. We hear quite regularly in focus groups, it's all been decided by other people. And so I think if this does go well, it might at least reassure the British public, who certainly haven't warmed to Trump in the way our friends across the pond have. It might reassure them that maybe it's not going to be as unpredictable and unstable as they thought. And so I actually think Keir Starmer, yes, of course, he's got to do the wooing of Donald Trump. But I think for the audience back at home, it is a bit of, I've got this under control, I can work with this, and I'm going to shield you from the worst of it.
Yes. I mean Charlotte, can I come back to you, Charlotte McDonald-Gibson in Washington, D.C. We're naturally focusing a great deal on the question of security and on Ukraine and a security backstop if there's a ceasefire and all of that sort of stuff for very, very good reasons. But tariffs is another big story here for all of us. We heard the Prime Minister announcing new tariffs earlier on in the day, the timing of tariffs. Keir Starmer wants to get, if he can, some sort of carve-out from Britain for all of that. Well, what did you think? Because the president was very, very tough when he spoke about Europe. He sounded a bit warmer when he spoke about Britain. And by the way, he was also insisting that this does not fall back on the American consumer to pay the bill of the tariffs, where, of course, it did. What did you take away?
Well, yeah, I think the tariffs are a huge story. And we have Mexico and Canada right now really quaking, trying to do everything they can to stop the tariffs coming in very shortly. So, yes, what Trump said to Starmer was very positive. He said it's a warm spot the UK is in. Also, what I thought was interesting, he said it's a place where I have investments, talking about the UK. So what do we read from that? Well, what's in his interests? So I think, as we've spoken about before, it often comes down to the money for Donald Trump. So, I think that was positive. And he really seemed to really go after the EU as well. He said, I think it was yesterday, the EU, was founded to screw the US over. So he's really on a bugbear about the EU at the moment and has spoken about 25% tariffs on goods from the EU. So I think if the UK can play that spot, well, we are not, we're out of the EU. And of course, Trump praised Brexit as well during those talks we just heard. So I think again, this is a good spot that Starmer is in when he goes in with his pitch for not putting tariffs on the UK.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel, they're talking now. Later on, we'll have that full-blown news conference. That sounded very like a new full-blown news conference, but there's more to come, more formally. And the questions we're talking now are going to be explored more by the journalists travelling with the Prime Minister from the Westminster lobby, as well as by American colleagues in the White House press corps. And they'll be pushing on all of these things, won't they? When it comes to tariffs, the Brits in the room are going to want to know, are you telling us that the Brits are out of the woods here? Are we in the clear? They'll look for a clearer answer on that.
One thing that's so fascinating is how much time the journalists are getting. I mean, this is part of Trump world now, isn't it? Where actually the time in front of the press in the fireside chat and then the press conference is going to be greater than the time of the actual talks, as far as I can work out. It's completely upside down for what you'd normally get for a presidential visit.
Yeah.
And that sort of questions being shouted out, the frenzy and the energy of the thing. Starmer hardly ever able to get a word in edgeways. Yes. And I think that really interesting balance as well that you picked up. Peter Mandelson, in an interview with the New York Times earlier today, talked about how Starmer would speak truth to power, but respectfully. And that balance, it wasn't a Love Actually moment, was it? It was a Macron moment. He couldn't sit by silently as Donald Trump said something that he knew to be untrue. But on the other hand, he didn't do a full-blown Hugh Grant showdown, David Beckham's left foot. So it's, I mean, to observe that, and more of that will come out because we have so much time of them both in front of the cameras.
Yeah, I mean Joe and Luke, when it comes to later on, the later question and answer session, I suppose Keir Starmer doesn't have to try and hog the limelight. He doesn't have to do a Hugh Grant. He can let Donald Trump speak, because that's what he's going to do, and just hope the right stuff comes out of the president's mouth.
Yeah, and I think, to Rachel's point, that the bit where he did correct Trump, where Starmer did correct Trump, was the bit that had already been done by another leader. It wasn't like he went in on something else. It wasn't like, oh, but you did call him a dictator. We all heard you. No. He didn't do that. He basically picked the safest path there. But it's an extraordinary moment. I mean, this new phenomenon of the way sort of Trump's conducting these things with this everyone crowded in while they're sat in their chairs. And I know it's been done before, but it is pretty sort of rowdy. It's not... If you look back to when Theresa May was out there and there was sort of, you gave the journalists who you wanted to be called upon, you gave their names in advance. And if you remember, it was the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg that asked a very difficult question, and he sort of looked to Theresa May and said, and that was one of yours? Like, as in, you chose for her to ask that difficult question. Whereas this is this pack where it's, being chosen, it feels a bit more at random. So the jeopardy, it feels much more difficult. But I've got to say, even we've been watching the pictures broadcast as well as listening to the audio, and you can hear the audio in Starmer's voice. He actually, I think Starmer sounds on pretty good form, given that, he'd only just arrived last night. There's, been a lot going on. But actually, I think, like I said earlier, I think he's got off to a good start. Goodness knows how the lunch is going now. You can't even bear thinking about what's being said over lunch, but...
Do we know if it's burgers?
Well, that's the big question, right? That could set him up for a very difficult evening.
Last word from you, Charlotte. Lots to look forward to when we get to the news conference later on.
Yes, absolutely. And as Rachel said, I think it will be interesting to see how the British journalists travelling with Starmer focus on Starmer, because Trump can, will and wants to be at the centre of everything. So if Starmer wants to get his point across, he has got to stand up. He's got to be a little bit more forceful than we saw in this early preview of what we get later. So it's going to be fascinating.
So it is, and we're going to be watching. We're going to be listening. Charlotte McDonald, Donald Gibson, thank you so much. Thanks to Joe, thanks to Rachel, thank you to Luke, and thank you to you for listening. Our producer was Emily Lee here, our technical operator James Blake. I'm back on Monday, and Kate comes in now to pick up this story where we leave off. This is Times Radio.
Online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
By the way, John, it's 7 o'clock. This is Kate Borsay, and the evening edition coming up.
and they can take care of themselves. But if they need help, I'll always be with the British, okay? I'll always be with them. But they don't need help.
As we speak, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is meeting Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. any minute now. The two